Welcome to the debate. Usually when we think of a community, we rely on a map. City limits, borders, tax jurisdictions.
Right, physical, defined boundaries.
Exactly. But a new civic economic framework called Cosmunity asks us to basically tear up that map entirely. We're looking at three core texts today on Cosmunity, the Ducius Guidelines, and the ancient Brehon Glossary.
And these texts propose replacing modern corporations and municipalities with systems based on ancient honor and, well, modern trusts.
And my position as a systems thinker is that these texts form a highly practical, fully scalable operating system for governance. They actually solve the extractive nature of traditional bounded communities.
And as someone focused on legal and cultural history, I argue that while profound, this is an unfinished conceptual architecture. I mean, it risks obscuring practical governance behind esoteric tech jargon and unresolved tensions.
Well, let's get right into the core problem here, which is capital extraction. Traditional community is defined by physical property lines, right? It's zero-sum ownership.
Yeah, the text diagnosed that modern isolation perfectly.
Right. Cosmunity redefines wealth as living bonds well kept rather than dead things. And it executes this using existing company law. It relies on structures like a company limited by guarantee or a CLG.
But wait, a CLG is still a state-bound entity.
Yes, but unlike a standard LLC, where owners extract profits, a CLG has no shareholders. It legally owns itself, so it binds all surplus revenue strictly to the community's purpose, rather than enriching private investors. It's a real, usable infrastructure.
Look, I get the appeal of the social vision and on Cosmunity. It imagines this unbounded ecosystem. But relying on an Irish CLG or a Missouri Perpetual Purpose Trust means you haven't actually escaped the state boundaries the system claims to transcend.
I mean, you have to start somewhere in the real world.
Sure, but you are still incorporating under a statutory authority. The Ducius Guidelines still require a legacy legal wrapper to exist. So what is genuinely new here?
Think of that legacy legal wrapper as an API, an application programming interface. The Cosmunity has to interface with the legacy legal world right now simply to open a bank account or to hold land.
Rewire the operating logic. It abolishes concepts like employee or consumer. It replaces them with functional roles. You have crew, prosumers, and outvestors.
Renaming a consumer a prosumer doesn't insulate the system from basic human friction, though.
But the internal structure physically prevents profit-taking.
I hear that, but this is where the tension with the ancient Brehon Glossary becomes really glaring for me.
Brehon Law had highly practical tools for when trust broke down in a society.
Like the honor price system.
Right. And it had ofkabal, which is lawful seizure of property, and troskav, the practice of fasting on a debtor's doorstep to force a legal remedy.
Fasting on a doorstep? Yeah, it was a profound legal obligation. So how does a modern prosumer practically enforce a remedy against another member in this new framework? The Ducius system assumes this utopian state of coherence, completely ignoring how messy human institutions get when real resources are on the line.
Well, I'd argue it structurally preempts that messiness through its decision-making protocol. They call it acceptance commitment.
Which is a form of consensus building, right?
More robust than that, in a traditional corporate board, a 51% majority vote marginalizes the other 49%. That creates immediate, systemic incoherence. Acceptance commitment requires unanimous consent, but with a highly specific mechanism.
How does that work in practice without grinding to a halt?
If you dissent, you cannot just block the vote. You are legally required to add your wisdom to the proposal. You have to actively evolve it until you can accept it. It's basically an algorithmic process designed to manufacture coherence out of disagreement.
So you never reach the point of needing to fast on someone's doorstep?
Exactly. It forces institutional maturity.
Even if you successfully evolve a proposal internally, you still have to process the complexities of real-world markets. And this brings me to the language used in Ducius.
You find the language alienating?
I do. The Brehon Glossary gives us tangible precision. Take the term koibnes wishisaya rudne. That explicitly defines the rights and fees for water crossing a neighbor's land to reach a mill. It's concrete, mud on the boots.
Sure, very grounded.
Right. But Duchess, on the other hand, tells us to replace intellectual property with infinite providence. And it calls market competitors completers.
Language shapes reality.
Changing the vocabulary doesn't change the underlying reality of resource scarcity. It just obscures practical economic functions behind language that, frankly, alienates everyday people trying to run a business.
But you cannot build a non-extractive system using the vocabulary of extraction. If you legally frame another entity in your trust guidelines as a competitor, your operational mandate becomes zero-sum. You must defeat them.
I mean, that's just basic market dynamics.
But if your governing documents classify them as a completer, your steward circle is legally bound to seek out ergodicity.
Ergodicity?
Yes, meaning they must systematically find ways for both entities to explore the broadest range of opportunities without destroying each other. The language physically alters the fiduciary duty of the organization.
And that fiduciary duty is supposedly going to be managed by artificial intelligence. This is where my concern deepens regarding implementation.
You're referring to the tech integration.
Yes, to scale this non-extractive collaboration, the text introduces an AI agent called Itami. It describes it as a shaman processing the group's collective unconsciousness alongside blockchain smart contracts.
It's a tool for synthesis.
We are looking at a framework that claims to value deep relational human bonds, yet it outsources its governance to generative AI and digital ledgers. That is an enormous contradiction.
The technology is precisely what allows those relational bonds to scale, though. Look at how they propose using their debt-free digital token, GRA.
The local currency model.
Right. It operates like a local mutual credit system. A community issues GRA to track regenerative work. Say a member spends a weekend restoring a local watershed. They earn GRA on the blockchain, which they can then exchange for housing or food within the community.
And crucially, GRA includes demurrage.
Yes, exactly.
Which forces circulation. If the token constantly loses a small amount of value over time, people are incentivized to spend it back into the community rather than hoard it. It prevents the wealth concentration we see in fiat currencies.
You see? The mechanics are brilliant, but tracking thousands of these microtransactions, calculating demurrage continuously, that requires immense data processing.
Sure, database management.
Ancient Brehon systems relied on the public ONACH, the regional assembly, to witness contracts and remember obligations. The blockchain and the AI serve as the modern ONACH. They handle the trustless accounting so human members can focus purely on the relationships.
But tracking a local exchange system doesn't require calling a large language model a sacred weaver. Dressing it up as technosis creates a massive barrier to entry.
You think the branding is the issue?
A civic system must be accessible. If participating in local governance requires users to navigate terms like monads alongside blockchain ledgers, it severely limits its viability. The Brehon system worked because its penalties and obligations were universally understood by everyone in that territory.
Well, this is where we have to evaluate the complete architecture. Cosmunity, anchored by the Duchess structures and Brehon frameworks, provides the exact legal mechanisms, like the trusts. It provides the economic tools through demurrage-based currency and the decision-making algorithms needed to scale non-extractive institutions today.
I'll concede it presents a masterful structural diagnosis of our isolated extractive reality. But the tension between the grounded accountability of ancient Brehon law and the highly abstract, tech-heavy language of Duchess remains unresolved. The architecture requires significant refinement before it can function seamlessly as a daily civic system.
The texts certainly present a deeply compelling foundation for a new civic economic system. The listener will have to decide whether this current iteration is ready for deployment, or if it is an emerging framework still finding its footing.
There is certainly much more to explore in these materials, particularly the daily mechanics of what they call commons capital. It ultimately asks us to reconsider how we draw our boundaries.
We started by talking about the map, the lines that strictly define where a jurisdiction begins and ends. The core question Cosmunity poses is whether we are ready to discard that map entirely and start managing our institutions as unbounded, living ecosystems.